to issue an annual report to tell us the scope of this problem. We know that in Orange County alone, we have a horrific issue, and the folks up here with me can talk about this. We have a horrific issue with opioid addiction and heroin. We lead the state in the overdose death rate from heroin. That is not a distinction any of us wants. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've lost 6 people in Orange County to heroin. In the last year, the data was kept for, I think 2017, there were 88 deaths in Orange County alone. And this would be true in Putnam County or northern Westchester or Dutchess, where I also represent those communities. Everywhere I go, someone has lost someone to this terrible disease and affliction. We've buried a lot of our neighbors and friends in the Hudson Valley, and it's a terrible issue for law enforcement and a real challenge, which is why I've also been active on new strategies like law enforcement assisted diversion. I have legislation called the Keeping Communities Safe Through Treatment Act, which the Orange County Legislature has passed a resolution in support of. District Attorney David Hubler and I did a press conference not long ago talking about this. Some of you may have been there. The idea is that law enforcement agencies, cops, should have the discretion to take people directly to treatment without booking them, if in their discretion it makes more sense. And we know there's always going to be violent offenders, and there's always going to be a really important role for law enforcement and for the criminal justice process. But when you're talking about chronic addicts, when you're talking about people who've been arrested 30, 40 times, we want to have new strategies or give the police officer discretion to take that person directly to treatment, which means you also need treatment beds, and you need to have the Medicaid funding that supports those treatment beds, which is of course why I've been so vocal on healthcare reform and not doing damage to the funding streams like Medicaid that support our opioid addiction combat efforts. This is how we fight the epidemic and get people into treatment, is to support treatment beds. But you got to get people to treatment. And then of course there's more. A few weeks ago we were here at the library, the Depot Street Library, talking about life-saving librarians legislation that I've introduced, which would do the simple thing of getting librarians a little training and some resources to have Narcan kits in libraries, because we know libraries are one of the places addicts go to take drugs and often get in trouble, often overdose. We've seen local libraries deal with this. We've seen local libraries considering things that would be unimaginable, like changing the locks on the bathrooms so that they can access them in an emergency to save a life. I carry a Narcan kit in the glove compartment of my official vehicle. I've been trained in the use of Narcan. And we know that every police department in my district has saved a life by being able to intervene rapidly. And so this is an all-hands-on-deck effort, and this is just the latest idea I have to get a handle on an area of the problem that I just don't hear people talking a lot about, which is the enormous business now in selling drugs on the internet, and the need we have to understand the scope of this problem and to get the federal government involved in tracking it. And the Stopping Online Opioid Sales Act is the first step in that. I'm pleased to be joined today by Chief Wanchu from Middletown Police Department. I'm also thrilled to be with a representative from Aileen Gunther's office, and also, of course, this person next to me, who I've spent a lot of time working with on different things. This is Stephanie Keegan, who's a member of my military advisory board and who has a very powerful story to tell on this issue as well. So what I'd like to do is let Chief Wanchu speak first, then I'll have Stephanie come up and share her story as well. Go ahead, Chief. Why don't you talk about how big an issue this is for you and your department?
Well, thank you, first of all, for coming here to share your mission with us today. Good afternoon. On behalf of Mayor Stefano, who unfortunately had a prior engagement today, I would like to welcome Congressman Maloney and other distinguished guests here to the city of Middletown. First and foremost, I would like to thank Congressman Maloney for taking some time out of his busy schedule to come here and meet with us to discuss this relatively new development within the deadly opioid epidemic. To be honest, when I first heard about the dark web and the opportunities that it can provide individuals to purchase highly deadly narcotics, I was shocked and very concerned. I have high school age kids of my own, so naturally my first thought was, how do I protect them? Within this police department, I have a highly dedicated group of men and women that will do whatever it takes to keep this community safe, but unfortunately, this problem goes beyond my agency's current capabilities. It is just too easy to access and order these materials. For that reason, law enforcement and legislators need to work together to come up with new and innovative methods for preventing parents and children in Middletown and other communities from being exposed to this type of illicit activity. Congressman Maloney proposed legislation is a big step in the right direction, and we will continue to work with him and other partners on the federal, state, and local level to ensure that the public is well educated and informed about these risks. Right now, we are fortunate to have had no known incidents of this type of drug distribution into our local Middletown community. It is my goal, and I think Congressman Maloney's goal as well, to ensure that no one gets the opportunity to start. I would like to thank Congressman Maloney for bringing this necessary attention to this issue, and to thank you for your continued support of law enforcement.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks a lot. And I would say we do a lot of stuff together, and we're always proud to stand with the Middletown Police, particularly on federal grants of any kind that can assist them in their difficult mission. I know these guys do some great bring back programs so people can bring in prescription drugs that they're not using. There's so much to this issue. We know it starts with law enforcement, and these guys do a great job. But there's 4 or 5 other things that are really important: prevention and treatment, and criminal justice reform, and overdose death prevention. That's the Narcan piece. These strategies all working together are going to make progress. But I want to introduce Stephanie Keegan as well, who's done so much for me and for the veterans community here in the Hudson Valley, but has a connection to this issue as well. Go ahead, Stephanie. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Keegan. This is my son, Daniel. Daniel was an 8-year veteran of the 82nd Airborne 7th Special Forces Group. He was the 2009 7th Special Forces Group Soldier of the Year at Fort Bragg. Dan died on January 8, 2016, because of his opioid addiction while he was waiting for treatment from the VA for PTSD. He waited 16 months and died 2 weeks before his first appointment. And I'm here today because I think that this bill will go a long way to saving other families from going through what my family is going through. I have a wonderful husband and 2 surviving sons who don't get to see their big brother live out a full and happy and successful life, which he would have undoubtedly done. He was intent on helping other veterans with their issues, with their PTSD and whatever other issues they had. And I promised him before he died that if we lost him, I would do that for him. So I left my job in June of last year, and I now work full-time on veterans and opioid issues. And I think this bill in particular is very important because I used to be a teacher, and I really believe the idea that power is in knowledge, and knowledge is power. And if you don't know what it is you're up against, you will never be able to properly fight the problem. Daniel used to tell me all the time that he was able to get his heroin ordered online with a credit card and FedExed to his front door. He was a young man with PTSD who never wanted to leave his house and never had to leave his house because these resources were so easily made available to him. And after he died and the police had his computer and they had his cell phone, wherever that source was that he was getting it from disappeared, just melted like ether. But he is now one of those statistics that no family should be a part of. And I am incredibly grateful to Congressman Maloney for the work that he's doing on a variety of different topics in this unfortunate situation.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you very much. You're the best. And I want to bring up Gene Gallagher from Anthony Gunther's office. I do want to point out that Stephanie Keegan is not just active on the opioid epidemic and on veterans issues in general, but she has been roaming the halls of Congress on my behalf because we have a piece of legislation to create a gold coin, a congressional gold coin, which is a very special thing. We only do 2 every Congress on behalf of the Purple Heart Hall of Honor here in Orange County and New Windsor. And I am personally hearing from other members of Congress that they say, this person showed up at my office and she's a woman I think lives in your district and she was amazing and she told me about how I had to support this bill, and of course I jumped right on it. So So she's literally in my legislative affairs department at this point, but is doing a lot on behalf of our vets. So I just want to give you that plug. You're the best. Let's hear from Jean Gallagher on behalf of Aileen Gunther.
Yes, my name is Jean Gallagher, and I'm a legislative aide for Assemblywoman Gunther. And I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today on behalf of the Assemblywoman, and to thank you, Congressman Maloney, for all the work you've done on this important issue. Our office gets calls every day from people affected by this opioid crisis. We're now seeing websites that offer drugs more powerful and lethal than ever before. On the state level, we're continuing to make resources available for those seeking opioid addiction treatment services. And we're also making returning unused prescription drugs easier, getting them out of the medicine cabinets. I want to thank Congressman Maloney's office for being such great partners in this fight. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. And so really the number one thing we're doing today with my legislation is trying to build a reservoir of information that will allow us to combat this problem. And I'm so glad to see so many members of the media here, because I think it comes as a shock to most people that you can sit down at your laptop and order drugs and have them delivered through the U.S. mail or through FedEx or UPS right to your front door. I think that would shock most people I represent. But this has become a huge business, and we don't have federal data on it, and we are behind the curve. And the sooner we get on top of it, the sooner we can get in the game and fight it. How to take the question?
So do you take this data that you hope to get and then turn it over to the FBI and Homeland Security? And
right. Well, we want Hank. We want DEA in the lead on this, and then we want to have strategies based on that information that are going to be a combination of data mining, probably, to get better data on and a better understanding of who's selling the stuff and how. We're going to have a better glimpse on how we have to reform our access to information on the internet to shut down these illegal websites. We're going to have international partners in that, because a lot of these sales are coming from overseas. Can I tell you something? I was recently in Afghanistan and in Iraq. If you go to southern Afghanistan in Helmand province, 75% of the world's heroin comes from Helmand province in Afghanistan. There are about 250 Marines there right now, including people from our communities. There's a family called the Myron family from Warwick. I met Ben Myron. He's in Iraq. Actually, this kid named Christian Toro from Beacon. There are members of our community right now fighting the Taliban and ISIS, but particularly in Helmand province, the Taliban. 60% of the Taliban's funding comes from selling opioids, selling opium that becomes heroin or opioids. 60% of their funding. That is their entire funding source, and it is so massive that it rivals the GDP of the entire nation of Afghanistan. And so the person in Orange County who's sitting down at their laptop ordering drugs online is literally funding the Taliban. That's not an exaggeration. That's where they get their money. And so it's bad enough that we're seeing our neighbors and our communities ripped apart by this epidemic, this addiction, and these overdoses. But we are at the same time sending our kids still today to fight the Taliban, who gets its funding from this same scourge. And so that vicious cycle is one we've got to understand better. And so these international websites that can literally use the mail, use UPS, use FedEx to send this stuff to our communities, we've got to get on top of that. And we've got to have strategies at the federal level that see this as the new front in the war on drugs, because the big quantities of drugs are not going to be coming in some van by some drug dealer. They're going to be coming in the UPS or the FedEx truck or the US mail, ordered by some dealer who's using the website. And that, I think, comes as a shock, and we don't have good data on it, and that's what we're trying to do.
It seems that we're behind the 8 ball in the whole drug prevention addiction fight, war on.
I'd like to think we have really finally understood the scope of this problem. We're paying a terrible price for it, but there are a lot of efforts going on right now at the federal level. We did pass meaningful legislation, the CARA Act last year, that will send billions of dollars into this fight. The budget that just passed contains billions more. That's good. I have been very aggressive in supporting local prevention and treatment efforts, bringing back millions of dollars in federal resources to support the folks who are working hard on this right now. But this is a team effort. I mean, this is law enforcement. This is prevention and treatment. This is overdose death prevention with Narcan. This is stopping online sales. And it is absolutely about supporting the Medicaid resources that fund treatment beds and having people in treatment longer so they can recover. It's understanding the link to mental illness and conditions like PTSD that affects our vets in particular. And so we're all in this together. And I tell people all the time, the number one thing that's going to happen here is moms and dads and coaches and parish priests need to talk to people, talk to your families, wake up yourselves about the prescriptions you're getting. You know, I think the drug companies have a lot to answer for. Our medical community, we were giving this stuff away like candy for a decade. You've been through a bunch of back surgeries. You know, this is good stuff. When you've got pain, it works. But, you know, you don't want a 3-month supply when you got 4 days of pain. And if it's sitting around in your medicine cabinet, some kid is watching, you know, somebody's in your home working. We know 75% of the people who use heroin started with prescription opioids in our communities. Think about that. So they started their addiction with a bottle with a doctor's name on it and a pharmacy label. That means we've all got to get in the game on this, because that doesn't seem like you're breaking the law. It doesn't seem like you're doing anything wrong, but it can lead you into a lot of trouble. And we hear these stories all the time. And when a kid can sit down at a laptop and run a drug business without leaving his house, something is wrong.
You mentioned the budget, and President Trump is supposed to unveil that today, and supposedly it includes $13 billion, I believe, for addressing the opioid epidemic over a 2-year period. So now with this legislation that you're introducing, where would this carve out in terms of money? Do you want to make sure there are details for what you're mentioning and what's yet to come? I mean,
No, I'm not focused on, the money's very important, and I'm very glad to see those resources flowing in addition to the money that was in the legislation I referenced earlier. You're right, it's about $13 billion over the next 2 years. That's good. But what we also need is information. What we also need is to understand the scope of the online drug sales problem, and to have new strategies at FDA and working with our partners at FedEx or UPS or the Postal Service to identify these shipments and to stop them. It's too easy to order drugs online, and it's a lot safer to commit a crime that way than to go out on the street and do it where a police officer or somebody might stop you.
Who would think the initial reports that would create this body of data? Local police departments? What kinds of information would they be collecting and then?
Right, what we're asking for is the federal government to collect this data, because it's largely an international issue, because these shipments often originate in other countries and come from overseas, particularly the fentanyl, which we're seeing come from China, $800 million worth of it in just the last couple of years. So this is largely an international problem. It's largely up to the federal government to collect the data and to share it with local police departments so that they can develop different strategies. I mean, you have to know where you're looking, right? I mean, if you're looking for the guy selling something out of his trunk, you may miss the FedEx truck that goes by that's delivering the shipment to someone's home that looks like a package from, you know, from Amazon or from some legitimate website. You know, the way we shop, the way we engage in commerce has changed dramatically over the last decade, and so has the drug trade. The drug trade is keeping up with these websites and this technology. We need to make sure the federal government is, and we need to give our local law enforcement the tools to stop it.
you talk about bipartisan support for obviously addressing the opioid epidemic. So in this legislation, where are you in terms of bipartisan support?
Right, we're introducing it. We hope to have robust bipartisan support. A lot of things I've been doing on this are not Democratic or Republican issues. This doesn't take a lot of money. There's no reason on earth we can't get a lot of Republicans on this, and I plan to. You know, that's where I've made my bones in this job. We've passed 27 bipartisan pieces of legislation in 5 years. I'm pretty proud of that. They tend to be efforts like this that are just smart, don't take a lot of money, can bring people together across party lines and do something good. Yeah.
I have some off topics. Would you rather them here, to the side?
Go for it.
Right. Can you just talk about Rob Porter? You said that you think there should be an investigation into him, right? Could you just talk a little about that?
That's right. So I've asked the House Oversight Committee to take a look at this. It's not acceptable that someone in the staff secretary job is working without a security clearance. I did that job. I was in that office for most of the second term of the Clinton administration. I did the top job for over a year. I can tell you there's a stack of red folders on the desk marked top secret. The staff secretary sees everything the president sees. I mean, there's a burn bag under the desk because when you're done with those memos, they go in a burn bag collected by a special team and incinerated every night. This is the most sensitive information our government has. The way the White House works is that it's actually a funnel of that has the staff secretary at the choke point. The National Security Advisor doesn't give a memo to the president. The National Security Advisor gives it to the staff secretary, who gives it to the president. Same is true of every other person in the White House, and this protects the president from information that's not ready for his attention. It allows people to get their views heard, and the staff secretary writes a memo on top of every other memo telling the president what it says, digesting it, Basically, here's what it says, here's what your choices are, here's what people think, here's how soon you have to do something, here's what you did last week. That means you have to read everything the president reads. And by the way, a lot more, because the staff secretary's job is also deciding what the president does not see. And that means our nation's most closely guarded secrets are seen by the staff secretary. I know. I read them. And when I went through that background process, just by way of example, the FBI sent field agents from their Montevideo, Uruguay office in South America over to Peru, to the little village where I worked with the Jesuits between college and law school, to interview the villagers about what I was doing there. And of course, every friend from high school, every friend from college, every place I ever lived, knocked on the doors to the right and the left of the apartments I lived in New York City. Everything I ever did, extensive questionnaires. And if you lie on those forms or leave something out, that's a crime. That's why we want to look at that form filled out by Rob Porter. We want to understand what the FBI told the White House. The women in question, who were the victims here, came forward in January of 2017, as I understand it, right off the bat, which means the FBI knew, and the White House would have known, that they had a disqualifying fact pattern. I'm telling you right now, the guy was never going to get a clearance. And yet, they let him do the job for 14 months without one. That raises a lot of questions. And it doesn't have to be some partisan game, and we don't have to kind of do an investigation just to do an investigation. But it is important to know that the guys seeing our top secrets cannot be easily blackmailed. This is exactly the kind of thing in someone's background that you don't want to discover when you're putting them in that job. This is the worst possible job. To have somebody seeing our country's secrets with a secret of their own is a problem, and we should get to the bottom of it.
Did you have Porter's job?
I did.
You did?
I was the White House staff secretary for President Clinton.
I'm sorry, I have one more off topic.
Go for it.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I have a question from a coworker here about your thoughts on the idea of compassionate support programs for people who may be using drugs like safe injection sites or medically assisted treatment. Is that something you're able to answer?
Yeah, well, look, I think the primary one I've been working on is law enforcement assisted diversion. I referenced it earlier. What that means is that the police officer who says, I've arrested this person 15 times, and this is not an exaggeration. I mean, you know addicts in Middletown who you cycle through the criminal justice process, spend a night in jail, get arraigned. All that's costing the taxpayers money, by the way. It's not doing anything to stop that person from being an addict. They're committing low-level crimes like shoplifting and snatch and grab or prostitution because they're feeding a habit. In the case of the kind of sales we're talking about, that's the kid sitting at home having his friends show up and buy some of the drugs he bought online to support his own habit. So the criminal activity is a function of the addiction. And so, look, the enlightened way to handle this is to go after the guys making money, to go after the kingpins, to throw the book at the people doing the major sales. But when you're dealing with the addict, to get that person into treatment for a sustained period of time in a treatment bed funded by Medicaid that the counties can afford, in good facilities with wrap services, and that's what works. And that is the compassionate approach. And other strategies like Narcan that are designed to save lives are really important as well, because we don't have to lose a life just because we haven't successfully treated the addiction yet. And that's where I'm focused. I'm not familiar with some of the other ones you mentioned. Anyone else? For me or for these guys? All right. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.